thanks to the organisers, thanks for the invite, thanks for the opportunity to bring solidarity from my union, PCS, that organises in the civil service, public sector and workers working on private contracts. And let me just say, in bringing solidarity, word that gets bandied around quite a lot, but I say it not just as a nice idea or some utopian dream. I would point out that in these troubling, divisive times, that solidarity is actually our most powerful weapon against the elites that would seek to divide us. Now, PCS is proud to have supported this, what I think is an inspiring event. I'm proud of our role, as Romain was saying, in developing a climate agenda within the trade union movement and our participation in setting up the 1 million climate jobs initiative. Let me immediately say, we're a union under the COSH, civil service, despite Brexit, there's no respite, that we're facing unprecedented attack on terms and conditions. We've been the only union targeted, and our union rights were attacked, including the method of collecting our subscriptions. I'm pleased to say it looks like we've defied that attempt to break us financially. The reason I mention this is that because it is a difficult issue to engage members and workers when they're facing such attacks. We've got to address the question of why is the environment an issue of trade union concern. But let me immediately say, from PCS's perspective, that we have found that when you take this issue into not just PCS but the wider trade union movement and explain the issues behind it, it can reinforce trade union organisation and trade union power. It can show that unions are more relevant, particularly to new young workers, and it puts trade unions at the heart of the debate that we need to have about what we mean by a just transition. Now, the Lucas plan, I mean, it's an inspiring event. Listening to the various reports, watching the film, and participating in the discussions, I think others have said, you know, it's not just a nostalgia fest. This day. This is about celebrating our history, and let's face it, if we don't, who else will celebrate our history? But the power in the Lucas plan, it seems to me, is how it came together, what it represents, and what it represents in terms of what's possible in the future. I think that's why we're here, talking 40 years on about a report produced by a shop steward committee in Lucas Aerospace in the 70s. Now, two personal anecdotes. I was involved in Blackpool Trades Council, and I actually encountered some of the shop stewards coming along when the book had just been published, and it captured my imagination at that time. It had a big effect on me, and I think any trade unionists that had the benefit of talking to the shop stewards, reading the book and engaging in the discussions, it had the same effect. But there was another personal experience that I remember about that's relevant to this issue, which is that Friends of the Earth also came to give a talk at Blackpool Trades Council. It was a bit about in the late 70s, and it was talking about the reports of the incidence of leukemia around a number of nuclear plants, including Sellafield. And we, for our sins, agreed to go in a minibus up to Sellafield, and we attended a public meeting, and we agreed, along with environmentalists, to leaflet against nuclear power outside the Sellafield plant on one of the shifts. Now, let me just say, I think lucky to get away alive. The first thing I would say about that. I was struck that it's just not enough. Whatever you think of nuclear power, whatever you think of the energy-intensive industries, we have to learn the lesson. It is not enough to just stand outside calling for their closure. If you're going to make any progress, you've got to engage with the workers and the unions organising the workers in that particular plant. Now, as I've said, we're proud of the role that we played, and I mentioned climate jobs. We're one of a number of unions with Campaign Against Climate Change Trade Union Group, brought together a number of unions, too few, but the numbers grow, with academics and campaigners and environmentalists, And we produced a report. Again, it doesn't have all the answers, but what's interesting about that report, and there is a common thread, because like the Lucas plan, it was Dave Elliott that provided a lot of our technical advice as well. So there is like a thread between the two. But we showed in that report that it's technically feasible and it's affordable, and I would argue politically possible, to create 1 million skilled unionised jobs. And that's just a relatively small and modest aspiration, and at the same time cut CO2 emissions by 80% over a 20-year period by looking at energy efficiency, insulation of homes and public buildings, retrofitting, looking at mass transit, different forms of transit on a public, integrated, clean basis, and looking to invest in wind and wave technologies in the renewable sector. And again, that was the start, an important start. Doesn't have all the answers, but I think it was another important contribution, a step on the way to developing our working class alternative. But I also make the point that we attempted to address this question: how are you going to pay for it? Hear it all the time. Well, hold on a minute, there isn't the time to address it fully, but with the 7th richest economy on the planet, since the financial crash in 2008, the richest 1,000 people in Britain have seen their already monumental wealth double over that period. That comes to the richest 1,000 people, not 1%, but 0.003% of the adult UK population, and they've enjoyed an increase in wealth of over 250 billion, which is enough to pay off the entire UK budget deficit in one go. And our work, PCS, we organise workers in revenue and customs, on the receiving end of a massive office closure programme and massive job cuts, the department that exists to collect the tax, alongside the tax justice network, we've shown that we're losing £125 billion a year to the public purse as a result of tax avoidance, tax evasion, and uncollected tax from the super rich. And anybody, what that shows, I would argue, is it never was, or should I say, it always was, and always will be, a question of political priorities. Absolutely. It is not about affordability, it is about what priorities we as a society want to give to what's important. Now, the thing I mean, we've touched on the themes, definition, fascinating discussions about socially useful production, about arms conversion, economy, scandalously reliant on producing weapons of mass destruction, acutely topical in the debate around Trident, and every single session I've gone into, to some degree or another, touches on the roles of workers and trade unions, and going beyond the immediate bargaining agenda, and how the unions develop an alternative and develop a just transition. And really, just to conclude, I want to follow on the points that Tony Kearns made when he referred to the TUC debate, where, although we lost, it was the only debate. I mean, this is typical of the TUC, and the world's going mad around it. The TUC managed to stage manage it so much so, there was only one actual vote at the TUC. And interestingly enough, it was around a radical motion that Tony referred to. Very good motion. We lost it 2/3 to 1/3, with the big beasts in the jungle coming out, the GMBs and the Unites coming out, posing a false choice between job protection and protecting the planet on which we live. They hid, I would argue, in a dishonest way in that particular argument. Now, we raised the question of the outcome of Paris. We raised a number of points about trade unions for energy democracy, about the question of air pollution in Britain, about links with war and the refugee crisis, the importance of an international climate justice fund. The international trade agreements need to be shut down as well. But what my basic point in conclusion is that we have to be honest that the fear of job loss is very real. And in those sectors, not least in many parts of the country, and it was reflected, it should be said, in the Brexit vote, the fear of job loss is not a mistaken belief. It is a genuine fear as a result of what's happened politically and economically in Britain in the last 30-odd years. And it's created a view sometimes where workers think, well, climate's a bit of an abstract issue. It doesn't really affect my immediate agenda. It can create an artificial division between the labour movement and the environmental movement. The suspicions on both sides, and we have to work to overcome those particular suspicions. But if you accept the science, there's no hiding place for those unions that argue that we shouldn't take decisive action on climate change, because the irony is the workers in the energy-intensive industries are the ones that have most to fear as a result of climate change. You see the job loss and job cuts in the oil and gas industry already. And this is an opportunity for the unions to think ahead. And this is an opportunity to develop new initiatives. For example, developing a climate jobs project. It came up in one of the arms conversion discussions. Developing a climate jobs initiative in the northwest. That when we see the direct action against the drilling for fracking in March and April, that we need to use that as an opportunity to say, first of all, their claims about job creation are a myth, but why not invest and use the skills at Barrow, in Wharton and Samlesbury in the arms industries to work with the trade unions to develop the technology and apply the technology for wind and wave power off the Lancashire and Fylde coast. There is a very good concrete example of what we can do to show we're not just against something, but we carry an alternative with us. That it's an opportunity to also make unions more relevant. And there's a bit of a crisis in the trade union movement, but we need to get people to join and to change the unions, to campaign for climate issues within the unions, and we need to develop a just transition. And the very final point that I make is that in so doing, it's got to carry genuine worker protection. The transition has got to place the interests of workers in these sectors at the heart, with the unions, unionised as they are in these sectors, need to use their power to protect the pay jobs and conditions and ensure that they exercise control of a just transition. In an economy where it should be remembered that 90 companies since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution are responsible for 2/3 of global emissions. And my argument is that you cannot rely on capitalism to take the action necessary in the time required. It poses serious questions about the nature of the economy. It opens up an important debate about questions of public ownership, and it gives us an opportunity, I think, to convey, to shatter the fatalism that we've been afflicted with for too long and argue that another world really is possible.
Thank you very much.